Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Business Bites. My name's Henry. I'm here from Team Chamber. I am delighted to be joined by Ruth and Victoria today. Now, Ruth and Victoria are part of Kent HR, who are a branch of our patron members, Brachers. They are going to be delivering a session today on sickness, absence in the workplace and the, implications of COVID and how you can manage this. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please make sure to put these into the chat and then we will get these answered after the session has finished. And without any more, I'm going to now pass you over to Ruth and Victoria. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining Ruth and I today. We're going to be imparting some of our knowledge and experience to you as to how best you can address absence management in your workplace. Absence management is always a hot topic, but it's a big one as well. So, we could easily spend a whole day delivering training on all the different aspects and legalities, but we've got about 25 minutes today. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully we'll provide you with some helpful prompts and some points to consider as to how you can best manage absence in your business and minimise its impact. Okay. So in today's session, ultimately, we're going to be going through 4 key headers. We're going to be talking about what is absence management, why is it important, the key issues affecting employers today, looking at the current landscape, and also giving you some practical ways to manage employee absence. Okay, so we're currently seeing the highest levels of absence rates for over a decade. Statistics say that currently on average for this year, the employees average or number of employees took 7.8 days over the past year. Why do we think that is? Is it because people are becoming more unwell? Is it that employers are failing to include staff wellbeing as part of their overall strategy? Are employers not managing sickness absence as effectively as they could? Like all HR issues, we want to be able to minimise the impacts that sickness absence have on not only your business, but also your people. So just looking at some statistics, a survey that was conducted by the CIPD Health and Wellbeing at Work in September 23 shows that we are seeing the highest absence figures in over a decade. But interestingly, the causes actually remain the same. So I'm not going to go through all of those in detail, but essentially the top 3 causes of short-term and long-term absence are really quite similar. Do these reflect what you're seeing in your business and the reasons for absences? Again, some more statistics here, but I'm not going to go through each and every single one of those individually, but it is clear to see that from these statistics, employers must be ensuring that they are addressing staff health and wellbeing. They're looking at how they're managing sickness absence, and they're keeping these topics high up on their agendas for discussion and for action. Okay, so what is absence management and why is it important? So absence management is an employer's approach via policies, procedures, or programs to reduce employee absenteeism, to avoid workforce disruption, and to maximise employee productivity. It does involve striking a balance between supporting those employees who miss work due to illness, injury, or unforeseen circumstance, right through to the other end of the process, which may involve disciplining employees whose absences are excessive, or instigating any ill health capability procedures for those that have health conditions affecting their ability to work. An effective absence management framework should support employees' health needs whilst providing clear and consistent guidance to your employees and to your managers. Ruth will be talking a little bit about the manager's role in managing absence in a few slides. So essentially, absence management is important for the smooth running of your business. Unplanned absence does cost your business through lost productivity, business disruption, and also sick pay. So therefore, if you're able to minimise unplanned absence, it follows that you're going to improve your productivity whilst managing your costs. It's not all about the pound signs, though. There is a human side of absence management. Unplanned absence can trigger feelings of dissatisfaction within the team. It can lead to workplace stress as well as frustration amongst employees who have to pick up the work in place of their out-of-office colleagues. It's really important to consider and look at your absence levels and to use data to make informed decisions about what might be going on in your workplace. Higher levels of absence can indicate that you've got problems within your business. You might have increased stress levels, perhaps even a toxic culture, misguided hiring, and insufficient training for the job can all trigger absence. So, by examining the patterns in your absence data, you can potentially pick up on these issues sooner and nip them in the bud. The result? A healthier workforce and a stronger business. So, if we look at the key issues affecting employers today and what does the current business landscape look like? Unfortunately, top of the list, cost of living. Continuing into 2024 from last year, the cost of living remains a key issue affecting employers and employees alike. With the rising costs placing increasing financial pressures on many to make ends meet, and the effects that this has on physical and mental well-being of individuals is invariably going to impact on absence levels within your businesses. A survey completed by Vitality and the Financial Times showed that money worries were continuing to rise and were now the leading cause of stress outside of work. And it's actually male workers who are experiencing the brunt of this. We can't talk about sickness absence today without mentioning COVID. It did, for most, change the world of work. It forced employers to identify new ways of working and to adapt their policies in response, which leads into home working and hybrid working. I think this was the main prompted by the pandemic and is one that has been introduced into our businesses as a new world of work. So whilst home working isn't a completely new concept, certainly hybrid working and the increased presence of that in our businesses is. So do you operate a hybrid way of working still? Do you have a policy? When considering this alongside how you manage absence, there are factors to take into account to ensure that you're taking reasonable, fair, and importantly, a consistent approach towards employee absence. And I say that in terms of, do you have a mixed workforce? So some people perhaps can easily work from home. Their role enables them to do so. Others, for example, factory workers, they don't have the choice. They can't perform their role at home. So how do you manage and record these absences fairly so as not to disadvantage one over the other? I think also it's fair to say that hybrid working has blurred the lines between home and work. It's become far harder to switch off between the two. Yes, home working does have its benefits, but the lines have become blurred when work invades your home. I think it's important to ensure that there is that separation between the two and that employees are able to focus on their personal lives also. What we can see as well is presenteeism and leavism in the workplace. Why do we think that presenteeism is increasing? So essentially, presenteeism is when an employee is constantly present at work despite being unwell. We've all seen that colleague come into work coughing and spluttering and sneezing and really thinking to ourselves they should be at home. Everybody does get sick, and taking time off work is completely normal, yet there are some employees that still feel the need to continue working despite their sickness. Are the financial pressures of the cost of living a cause of this? Yes, likely so, but not the only reason. 46% of employers in a recent study say that they've worked in recent months despite not feeling physically or mentally well enough to perform their duties. So that's nearly half. The consequences of presenteeism is that it's found to certainly decrease productivity and efficiency. I think it's quite obvious to say that when you're sick, you cannot perform to the best of your ability. And in fact, studies suggest that those who show up for work ill can be over 30% less productive than when they're well. It also creates a domino effect on other staff members. Illness spreads, productivity decreases, absence rates increase. And also there's potential health and safety risks for those who are unwell and not obviously operating at 100%. And those risks can be quite significant. When we look at leavism, the new term on the block, although however it has been around since 2013, its prevalence has escalated in the new world post-pandemic. And essentially this is where employees are using their annual leave to focus on work instead of resting and recuperating. On the surface, leavism might appear as the solution to higher productivity and output. After all, employees are working longer, right? This is a good thing. Wrong. The reality is that if employees are not rested and refreshed from taking genuine time away from work, they're more prone to mistakes and errors and more prone to burnout. We have to be away from work and take leave in order to maintain that work-life balance and a good health. Without the break, your employees are lining themselves up for illness and potential mental health problems, which in turn in turn creates absenteeism, and it triggers the negative impacts on your business of sickness absence. But as with everything, you need to strike a balance when managing absence. Watching it too closely and policing it too closely can encourage that culture of presenteeism, with your staff dragging themselves into work instead of taking time off sick for fear of reprisal. On the other hand, being too lenient with time off can have the opposite effect, where employees take time off for the smallest reason because they know there won't be any consequences. So what are some practical steps that you can take to ensuring that you're managing your absence effectively in your business? Okay, number one is have a policy. Why do you need to have an absence management policy? Well, it's a key tool in absence management. As I've said, it needs to strike the balance between your employees knowing that they can take sick leave and have days off, whilst preventing them from taking excessive amounts of sick leave, and also addressing and explaining how absence is going to be managed. You may well have other policies that do address different types of absence and different leave, but for the purposes of today, we're addressing sickness absence. So what do you need to have in your policy? We recommend it should include the following. First and foremost, the notification process or policy. So how do you want your employees to notify you that they're going to be absent? Is a text message sufficient? Do you want a phone call? Who has to be contacted? Is it the line manager? Is it the supervisor? Is it HR? So set out in your policy, first and foremost, what that process is. Without a clear process setting out what is required in regards to notification, taking action to address non-compliance will prove extremely hard. Secondly, details of how absence is going to be recorded and measured. Think about trigger points. So what is an acceptable level of absence? After all, we all get sick, so this isn't about a zero tolerance. Triggers could include, for example, and some of you listening today might be familiar with the BFI, Bradford Factor Index. Traditionally, this has been used in manufacturing environments, but it looks to address and manage short-term intermittent absences, which are unplanned and cause the most disruption to day-to-day operations. It looks at a formula of occasions times days, and it gives you a score, and companies then instigate certain levels of what is considered acceptable, and anything beyond that would trigger formal action. I'm not suggesting BFI is the only tool to use, it's just an example. Then there's the return to work. So what happens when an individual comes back to work after sickness? There's the return to work interview. Oh, sorry, apologies. I've got overexcited and I've skipped forward. I'm just keen. There's the return to work interview. So that's really understanding the reasons for the absence. And Ruth will talk to you a bit more about that shortly. But there's also the requirement to complete relevant certification. So depending upon the length of the absence, you might have self-certification versus a medical note from the doctor. But also what's happening when they do come back, and particularly in instances of long-term sickness, where an individual has been away from the workplace for some time, addressing things such as a phased return, any reasonable adjustments, any occupational health that may be required or support that you may seek. But again, Ruth will talk to you in a bit more detail about that a bit later on. I think you do, and it is important that whilst you will stipulate in your contracts of employment the sick pay entitlement, it should also be contained within the policy. So even if it's only statutory sick pay and you don't pay any occupational sick pay above and beyond that, you still need to detail in your policy what happens to their pay if they miss work and what they are entitled to and eligible for. And finally, at what point and under what circumstances would you start formal action? Yes, it's okay to take formal action to address excessive levels of sickness absence. You can do this. It's not unusual for companies to issue absence warnings that align with the disciplinary procedures, and ultimately, it is a fair reason for dismissal. It could be a possible outcome, but remember, there's a number of things to factor into your considerations. It's always based on the individual circumstance and should be in line with the relevant policies and procedures you have in place. Okay, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ruth. She's going to share with you some more practical advice and some steps on what you can do to manage absence in your business.
Thanks, Vic. Hope I'm in the middle here. Right, so now we'll look at the line manager's role. So obviously, whilst HR might write those policies with the help of senior management, it's actually those line managers, the ones that are implementing it and making sure that it's followed. They're normally the ones who receive that first notification that someone's going to be off sick. So they need to follow that up. If it's not followed, I wonder who here has allowed a text message when your formal process doesn't allow it. Line managers will also need to ensure that sickness absence is recorded properly. So this could be an email to your HR, or is it on a HR system, or simply just an Excel spreadsheet? So upon returning to work, line managers are the one who complete that return to work interview and ensure that that's recorded correctly with HR also. But I'll talk more about that in a second. On top of all the formalities, line managers are also there to be providing ongoing support to those employees as and where needed. They are the employee's first point of contact and should be able to signpost them to places of support and help with adjustments which may help them returning to work or to continue being present after an absence. So the majority of time, sickness and absence is routine, nothing to be concerned about. However, there are some times where line managers may need to seek some guidance from HR. Now, I know I would much rather answer questions about sickness absence up front than it become an issue further down the line where it was mismanaged. As HR, we can also help you consider any adjustments that are outside of your control as a line manager, provide guidance over what may or may not be reasonable as an adjustment in the company, and also help you with occupational health referrals, and to help you recognise what policy or process should be followed to best manage the current absence-related issue you're facing. So one thing the line managers can do to support all of this, as mentioned previously, is role modelling. The majority of people learn from watching what others do. Now, seeing their managers enact these policies and follow it with other people shows them what to do and actually what to expect as well when they're feeling unwell. So finally, the line manager must ensure confidentiality. Your relationships are all based on trust, and any breach of the confidentiality could result in a breakdown of this relationship and potentially a grievance or a claim. So stop, think. Does this person need to know this information before telling it to them? And also ensure information is fact-based and not assumption or opinion. So now let's look at record keeping. So you should be recording dates of absence, but also the reason for any absence and the details of any discussion surrounding that. This allows you and HR to identify and question patterns in the first instance. Records should be maintained in all HR systems, or in the absence of a HR system, they should be securely stored and accessible only by those relevant personnel. This will ensure that you're complying with data protection requirements. However, please do check your own GDPR policy for any other details on how you record keep in your company. So now let's talk about those return to works. So what are the things that you should be discussing in these meetings? Obviously, we've got the reasons for absence. What is the nature of the illness? Is this an ongoing issue? What are the side effects of any medication they're taking? And is there further expected treatment? Are there any other circumstances which may be affecting an employee's attendance, such as personal issues? Whether the employee believes that the absence is a result of any long-standing health issues or disability, or in fact, workplace issues. Assessing the needs of that employee and any ongoing support as a line manager that you can offer to ensure that employee is able to stay in work or return to work early. And any consequences of the absence in line with your policy. Now, this may have been discussed previously if this is a long-term absence, such as, is there any impact on pay? Have any triggers been met? And what do these next steps look like? Return to works also show that sickness absence is actively monitored in your workplace. And they're your first line in defence against dishonesty when it comes to sickness absence. No one wants to be lying to another person's face. Now, as you can see, the return to work interviews can help you record the reason, give you further information. Now, this can all go towards preventing further sickness absence. It also can allow managers to provide early support to employees to hopefully prevent further sickness absence down the line before it becomes an issue. Now, alternatively, if that person is off on long-term sick, then ongoing absence review meetings should be discussing the same things. When it comes to managing sickness absence, any of it, long-term, short-term, persistent or non-persistent, all of this data that you're collecting and recording in these meetings will allow for you to make those fair decisions on any process that you are currently following. And remember, they will also be the basis of your defence for any claims that an employee may bring. Now, talking about records, I just want to give you one word of advice, which is something I see time and time again. When discussing employees, you might think that you're just venting your frustrations over email to Susan in HR, but you should always stop and think about whether you would be comfortable with that email showing up in an employment tribunal. So communication, and this is a really important point. We often get the question, can I contact that person who is off sick? Now, the short answer is yes. After all, they're still employees. However, you do need to be mindful of the reason of their absence and what communications you are sending them. And there are some guidelines to consider when doing so. So how, when, and what you should communicate when it comes to employee sickness absence. And this is really pertinent when it comes to employee on long-term sick. So ACAS guidance states that an employer and employee should stay in regular contact during absences. However, when should you contact them? How should you contact them? And whether this is the line manager, a different manager, or a member of HR that's doing the contacting, this should all be agreed between the employee and employer. So if it's not a business critical question, then you should avoid contacting them. With stress being one of the major causes of sickness, if anything, this can actually prolong people's sickness and cause stress or increase stress levels for those that are already off with stress. The best thing to do is let them focus on their recovery and let them know that you're here to support. Now, in smaller companies, I appreciate this can be much harder. Perhaps they are the only ones with the name of that important contact. But you should put plans in place to ensure that you don't have this single point of failure at any given point. Now, whilst communication with those who are off long-term sick is important, you always need to stop and think if it's appropriate and necessary for you to contact them. Now, regular communication is a way of checking on an employee's well-being, along with reviewing their support needs. You can also utilise this to discuss any updates or changes to the business that you need to let them know about. But also to note, just because that employee is off sick, that doesn't mean they don't want to or can't attend that team outing or that Christmas party, which is why it's super important to have these discussions and agree now about the how, when, and what communications you're going to have with that employee. So, as we all know, prevention is better than cure. And so what I'll do now is talk a little bit about well-being overall, and this should contribute to reducing sickness absence in the workforce in the first place. So in the top spot, as Vic has clearly said, having that clear policy lets everyone know what to expect and what is expected. Now, SMEs, which I'm sure a lot of you are far less likely to have a strategic and proactive approach to health and well-being provision. And this is mainly due to resources, but you are still likely to offer services. However, this can lead to services being paid for and provided to their employers that are not useful or used. Do you know if your company has an overall strategy? This could be as simple or as complicated as you like, but it must set out the objectives of what you're trying to achieve. Regardless of creating this full complex strategy or just providing services, your first step is always to give your employees a voice by asking what they would like to see on offer. Now, there's many health and wellbeing services you can provide, from employee assistance programs. Note to all of you online, check your business insurances, as it may actually come with EAP. Mental health first aiders, to flexible working policies and mental health days. Do you know currently only 25% of companies offer employees health plans? This provides access to independent services like GP appointments, and this can offer employees quicker access to some health services, avoiding those long NHS waiting lines, and this can impact people's health and recovery times quite significantly. Now, with mental health, open communication is key, and company culture will play the biggest role here. And this is not something you can implement quickly. Creating that psychologically safe workspace takes time, training, and resources. Having both internal and external support will help you embed this culture. And it starts at the top. So I'm looking at those of you online with the business owners and managing directors. Now, there's lots of factors that can contribute to a person's mental health, and every company should consider approaches that they can take on such topics as menopause and other chronic health conditions. I read a post yesterday about minding the gap. Now, we all have processes to follow and know what to do when someone breaks a leg. So why are we not preparing with these other things that keep coming up time and time again? Having these plans in place for accommodations you can already make for a variety of these mental health contributors will ease the burden on your managers. It will give them some action they can take straight away and also empower them to make decisions. Now, there are several ways that you can address financial well-being. The first being paying for fair wages. You might consider becoming a living wage employer. So this not only supports your employees, but can actually be a great attraction for talent when you're looking to hire people. Advice can be offered through pension providers. which may help people plan for the future. And sessions can be organised through the Citizens Advice Bureau. And also having knowledgeable line managers. This means they can signpost to services such as step change. Now, us Brits are renowned for being reserved when it comes to the topic of money, and opening those lines of communication in a similar way to that of mental health. It's okay to not be okay, and that includes financially. Knowledge sharing of other people's lived experiences can be invaluable support to others. So did you know it's actually Debt Awareness Week, 18th to the 24th of March? This might be a good place to have a springboard to open up those conversations in your workplace. Now, there's no magical button that you can press to prevent staff absence, but with a combination of some tools, you can take steps to minimise it. Obviously, I'm going to say this again, clear guidelines. This is your policy. These are your clear guidelines. Now, communication. A lot of the times, places have policies and procedures, but they're just not communicated effectively. How do yours get communicated? You could use the induction, but how about ongoing communication as people have stayed there year on year? Do you actually know what your formal process is, and do you follow it? Now, also, let's be clear about the types of leave that there are and any adjustments that could be easily made. This might be parental leave for those working parents, or what about headphones for those that get overwhelmed in an open plan office? What about if you can't give overall flexibility? Can you allow it in an ad hoc manner? I'm sure we all know of someone who's called in sick to take a delivery just because their employer would never let them work from home. Now, training your managers, this is, I say, close to my heart. I love training the managers. The skill of people management is not one that everyone has innately. And quite often people find them in management positions with having zero training. And by investing in management training, you're giving your managers the tools that they need to handle absence management themselves. This means you'll be freed up to focus on other important things. And also, without training, they may fail to spot patterns in absences or deal with it ineffectively. This can, again, damage relationships within their team, amplify problems, ultimately leading to a claim. Now, being flexible. So I've got two things that won't actually impact your bottom line. You can give the employees the opportunity to work more flexibly where possible. Granted, as we've said, we know this will not work for all roles. However, this works by helping manage their work-life balance, and this could be flexing their hours, place of work, even days of work, or a combination of all three. However, make sure the offer of flexible working is genuine. I once heard someone say to their managers, leave loudly. This to them meant their managers voiced if they were working flexibly, be it to pick up their child or go to the gym. And this was a signal and role model to others that this is okay, saying we offer flexible working and we mean it. You could also provide some form of occupational sick pay. You may think this does cost money, but it doesn't. It may mean you don't save money when an employee is absent on sick leave, but with money worries being a top concern in 2024, knowing that they will not lose out financially when ill can have a positive impact on employee stress levels and can reduce levels of presenteeism, which, as we know, does actually cost a business a lot of money. Now, also create that wellbeing program. As we've said previously, this can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be, but focusing on employee wellbeing helps overall fitness within your workplace and can reduce absences. Now, even the smallest change may make enormous differences, and I repeat this to you, you need to start with asking your people what will make a difference to them. And on that note, here's my final slide. I am hoping today that we've challenged your view of what sickness absence management is and focused your attention on the fact that managing sickness absence is not just what you do when a person is absent. And whilst we don't have time today, I thought I would just touch upon that, like everything in business, there is always risks of an employee bringing a claim, and managing sickness absence is no different. So the key points to mitigate those risks are as on the slide, which will be sent to you after the webinar. And so on that note, I will hand you back to Henry.
Perfect. Thank you both so much for that session. I'm sure everyone will agree with me. I thought that was really engaging and lots of points to take away. Now, I appreciate David Smith from Bold Biz Coaching, sorry, had a question in the chat. So David, if you'd like to unmute to ask your question, and anyone else, if you have any further questions, feel free to drop these into the chat.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
loud and clear.
Thank you. So as I put in the chat there, a lot of things I agree with much that you've said. I fear that we need to strike a balance. My fear is that society is pandering a bit to well-being issues, sickness. I'm going to sound a bit like an old Luddite here, but I'm really not. But I do fear that businesses have lost the ability to have a robust sickness policy. So I've used the example there of a common cold. People should be working with a common cold, but COVID has kind of made that, probably changed that a bit. Yeah. And so do you think there is still place for companies to have the conversation that is quite a strong sickness policy?
Absolutely. I think I don't disagree with anything that you said there, David. It's very real that COVID has indeed, changed the landscape. But I think there is still a real place in every workplace that does set out how you're going to manage that absence and address unacceptable levels of absence. Because ultimately, an employee is employed to do a job. And if they're out of the business more often than they are present, they're not actually fulfilling their own contractual obligations. So I think, yes, my shout out really to every employer is don't be afraid to address sickness absence. But I think it's in the positioning and how you do that. So it's making sure that, all the things that we've said today with a clear policy, managing the expectation, but having those open discussions around understanding the reasons for absence, identifying if there is an underlying health condition, which you would then address slightly differently versus your regular persistent absentee who is off with a cold. And I know you could say, but actually, Vic, you've just said that everybody gets sick. So where do you draw the line? But I think it is acceptable to have a line and to manage that, providing you've got these steps in place. Okay, so it's not just the finger in the wind.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. Does anyone have any final questions? We've maybe got time for one more. If anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or just unmute and ask away. Anyone got any more questions?
That's a good sign.
Give it just a moment. Yeah. Paul, you've unmuted. Paul, did you have a question? Sorry.
Yes, I did put a question in the chat. Is it legal to offer financial incentives to reduce absenteeism? Obviously, on the understanding that they don't then go on and cause you problems with presenteeism.
Okay, so just to caveat that with Ruth and I are not legal advisors, but from my own personal experience, I've worked with an organisation that was previously that was made up of a very complex workforce and included those with disabilities of a different nature. And we often had the conversation around how do we manage absence and what does that look like? And it was always a difficult one, in so much as you need to be fair and consistent and not be in a position where you are disadvantaging or penalising anybody over somebody else who does have health reasons why their absence may be affected. I would tend to err on the side of I wouldn't suggest financial incentives for attendance. But I think that would be something that if you were to do, certainly understand your workforce and potentially seek some form of legal advice to ensure that you are not opening yourself up to any potential disability discrimination claim.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And just a final thought, Joe, I know you mentioned something briefly in the chat. This will be the last question. Did you want to unmute to ask? Sorry, that was Joe Connell. You put a point in the chat about managing adjustments, which are not always realistic in small teams. I don't know if you wanted to caveat that with a question at all.
Sure, always welcome to pop us an email if that's easier.
Perfect. Yes. Well, that brings us to the end of our session. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Ruth and Victoria again for hosting such an engaging session. Thank you all for attending today. Like Ruth and Victoria said, the slides will be sent out to you after the session should you want to make the most of those, and they're both happy to answer questions that you may have after the session. Should you have them, just let me know. I can put you in touch. But I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, And thank you all ever so much for coming.